Okay, so very good evening to all of you, all the viewers. So myself, Sourav Banerjee, I am the head of community relation at Learn for Cause. And today in this session, we will be talking about startup communities, entrepreneurial ecosystem. Today in this session, we will be talking a lot about what are community-based startups, what are the difficulties which these startups are facing right now in India, and also what are the possible solutions towards those problems. So here we go for today's session. So starting with the concept of what is a startup, uh, especially with the advent of Shark Tank India and all the other popular reality shows, startup word has been very familiar with Indian households now. It's been like everyone wants to start a startup. So following that trend, now another term has coined community-based startups, right? So people are now wondering that we have known about startup, but what is this community-based startup? So community-based startup is a kind of a startup where people foster the startup is fostering a community to build itself, to foster itself, and to grow in the process. So quickly with this, we will be following the total session with the principles. So for any startups to grow, there are few of the principles, right? Since we are talking about startups, there are three principles which every vibrant startup community should follow. First is economics. So when I talk about economics, guys, it's very important because startup is not a not for profit organization, it's a for profit organization. And when I say that a startup is a for profit organization, then economics and its factors plays a very important role in managing the better allocation of that startup and also the community which is supporting that. Next, we have sociology. So to start with, I will just give you a definition of what sociology means. So sociology basically means the science of reading what people understand and what people wants from other people. That's what sociology means. It's a science for knowing more people and more community behavior. So that's the reason why sociology plays a very important role when starting a vibrant community for startups. Next, we have the geography. So this is a very this is a term which is not look into more details, but trust me guys, geography plays a very important role when it comes to creating a startup with a vibrant members. Why? Because people in different places of this earth depends on where they are living, what are the standards they are following, and what are the intellectuals they are having in that particular geographical area. So with this, we will move towards the next section. Now, talking about economics, economics, as I said, is one of the key features for any startup to grow. Uh, Economics can be macro or micro level, right? So here we will be discussing about few of the external economics factors which are very important while making a startup grow, which is community based. So the first thing is the infrastructure. What is the infrastructure which you are having in that particular startup? Next come the specialized legal proceedings. With the next thing is accounting services, suppliers, and labor pool. So what are these basically? These are the few factors which affects the economics of that particular startup. So when I say this, understand that if these factors are having higher fixed cost, then the overall spending of that particular community in terms of startups will be really high, which will decrease the economic viability of that particular community. So that's the reason why economics plays a very important role when we talk about growing a community based startup. Moving forward comes the sociology. So guys, it's very important to understand that we are all familiar with the success which Silicon Valley, which is in California, US, has, but none of us know what is the success, what is the reason behind those success. So the reason behind that success is that there is a development of a particular unsung community within those Silicon Valleys. Now why I'm saying that, this is because in Silicon Valley there are a lot of startups, right? And those startups are competing with each other, but at the same time they are also part of a larger community, a community where these startups share information, share the new adaptation of new technology, and also leverage on those innovations. This is the reason why the whole startup ecosystem in US, which is based out of Silicon Valley mostly, is so grown and so developed other than the other tech flashpoints in all over the world. Now, uh, As I said, there are the four main features of any startup to grow for a community perspective. First, if there is a unsung community between the different startups in India, there will be more information which will be shared within them, which will again affect the adaptation of new trends and technologies. Guys, understand one thing: we all are living in a world which is really changing in a very fast pace. Because of this change, we are now adopting new technologies in every intervals of times, and for this new adaptation of technologies, companies which are tech based need to adopt new technologies in a continuous manner. And this can only be done if there is a proper share of information within these startup ecosystems, which will again lead us to more leverage on innovations, and ultimately which provides us a better opportunity to succeed whenever a new technology comes. Understand, guys, if there is a no innovation in a tech based startup, the startup is doomed to fail. So that is why community and its implication in this startup world is very important. Next, we will be talking about the geography. So, talking about geography, it is very important for any startup to grow. Why? Because people tend to differ from thought process to speciality in places to places. Like, for example, if I talk about North Korea, you won't find too many tech brains over there because the geography doesn't allow them to be so much techy because of the possible implications. But if I talk about countries like India and even some patches of Africa and China, these places are really good in tech. Why? Because there is ample opportunity there, and the geography which where these places lies allows those people to have those certain skills. That's why, or by building a community, it becomes very important that you look into the perspective of geography in it, where you are trying to create the community. If you are trying to create the community in a pan India basis, then you need to put all the factors into play. I hope you have understood what is the importance of geography while building a startup community. Next, we will be talking about different segments in a community. What are the different types of people? So, like we are talking about a startup which is a community based. So, like in startup, we have entrepreneurs who are the people leading the whole organization. In the same manner, in a community based startup, we also have entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs are individuals who are responsible for leading the whole startup community. Next, we have few of the characteristics which a entrepreneur must have. So for any startup, the leader, the entrepreneur must have a long-term commitment. That long-term commitment should promote inclusive growth among its members of the community. Apart from this, there should be regular activities and events that should be taken into consideration by the entrepreneur, the person who is leading the whole startup community, which is community based. When I say about activities and event, what is the reason for this is basically these events and activities actually promotes the engagement among the community, which will again provide long term benefit to that startup where the community is based upon. Quickly moving forward, we have the participants of startup community. So as I said in the previous segment, in a startup community there are two type of people. The one part of the people are leaders who are leading the whole startup community in that particular company, and then there are feeders. Now we will be looking into more details about the leaders and feeders. Talking about leaders, as the name suggests, these are the people who are responsible for leading the whole particular group of people in that community. So they are future entrepreneurs or already an entrepreneur in their career. Next, there are few of the characteristics which is very important for any entrepreneur or any leader for that reason to have. First thing is long term commitment. So there is a lot of question which I have been asked in multiple forums, that should we create and should we have a long term commitment, long term planning, or a short term planning. So for my suggestion for those will be, if you are having a long term commitment, it's always better because it gives you a better outlook towards your community. But if you want to work on that long term commitment, you need to just divide that long term commitment into short term goals. By doing that, it will be promoting your particular long term commitment, and also focus, also there will be a focus on doing the long term commitment rather than just dreaming about it. Next, there are different inclusive of anyone who wants to engage within the startup community. So this is very important. If there is no inclusivity among the members, if the people who are old members of that particular community, if they are biased with the new members, then you won't consider that there will be a overall development of that community itself, because that community will lack the new resources and new thought process, which will again be a disadvantage for that community. Next, there should be other things like mentorship. So for a leader, it is very important, and myself also, I am very firm believer that mentorship is very helpful for anyone who is in any portion of their life, because mentorship helps a person to have more better outlook towards the whole journey, which is in this case building the startup. Next, that person who is a leader must be open towards experimenting new techniques. This is for very important consideration, that there should be a person who is a leader who should always implement new thought process and new experiments. If those experiment passes the time, then those experiments should be taken into longer perspectives. If those experiment fails to attain the success, then those experiments should be fired from the whole process of the management. Now, talking about the feeders, in a startup, there in a startup which is community based, there are different sections of feeders. One is the government that exists to support, and when I talk about government, this portion of the feeder is very slow in its working. As you know, governments are always slow in taking decisions because there are multiple hierarchy which is to be maintained. Next comes the universities. Universities, according to me, is a great pool for talents. These organizations which are universities also provides a greater chances of making a alumni network in the process. Apart from that, feeders also includes investors which are again divided into two parts: venture capitalists or angel investors. Venture capitalists are companies which are managing a huge sum of money and investing it in different startups and companies. Then comes the angel investors. Angel investors, unlike the VCs, are not companies but rather an individual who has gained certain monetary value in their life and wants to invest those monetary values in different startup in order to gain profits. Next come the mentors. Mentors are people who have joined that particular community with the overlook to volunteer to support the community with whatever experience they have gained. Possibly, if mentorship is needed, then I think mentors are very important for any community to have. Next comes the service providers. Service providers are people who are providing a service to that community. Maybe lawyers, maybe accountants, maybe CAs, and all those type of people. Those people who have a profession adjoined to their particular service. Next come the large companies. So for large companies, there are classical problems which is being faced by any startup based community which is very large in outlook. One is the patriarchal problem. So when I say about patriarchal problem, the problem which is faced by most of the startup is that there is a unitary flow of decision making. What I mean by that is that there is only one person, the entrepreneur, the leader might be, who is taking all the decisions. This creates a serious problem that there's no flexibility of decision making in the process. If a person who is the leader takes a wrong decision, the whole startup community which is led by him will be suffering from this decision. Next point is complaining about the capital. So capital is something which is very important for any startup, whether it is a community based startup or whether it is not a community based startup, to run. Why? Because capital is the very foremost thing for any capital or any startup to function in a day to day basis. Being too reliant on government, again, being too reliant on government schemes provide a very disadvantageous section for any startup, because governments, as I have said earlier as well, is very slow in working, and might be that some of the help which someone can get from a government takes years to come. Then there is making of short term commitments. So now this is a very debatable statement. Short term commitments can be of a better manner if those short term commitment has a larger objective to meet a long term commitment. If those long term commitments are divided into short term commitment, then those short term commitment is better. But if a company, if a startup has only short term commitment and no larger objective to attain, then I think making of short term commitment will be a very disadvantage for any startup based community. Next, having biased against comers. So this is very prevalent in companies which are of mid-size, right? All the mid-size startups which are community-based face this problem. Those startups are not open towards the newcomers in the community. Why? Basically because they have that patriarchal problem. They want that their decisions and their outflow should be maintained in the whole community, which sometimes is not followed by the newcomers. So we will be discussing about all the written points in one by one way. Coming about the patriarchal problem, as I've said, this patriarchal problem is very prevalent, and if it is existing in a particular community, that can be very harsh for that overall growth of that particular startup. Now, possible solution for this patriarchal problem could be the use of network. Like, as in computers, we have multiple computers connected to a network, which means that not just one computer has control of something. There is a section of checks of powers and balance in the process, which ensures that no one computer has been given the full autonomy to control the other computer. So like the way we have work in a network of computers, we can apply the same rule in the functioning of that community. If we have multiple networks organized in a particular startup community, then there will be proper checks in power and balances, which will again promote the overall functioning and management of that particular community based startup. Following this, we have another very big problem, which is complaining about the capital. So here there are two ways to address this particular problem. So you need to first identify what kind of a startup you are. If you are having a goal to accelerate your whole growth story and maximize the profit and maximize the revenue, then I would suggest that you should go for raising the capital. Now when I talk about raising the capital, this is again a very debatable topic. You can raise capital by angel investors, or you can raise capital by VC firms. So both the ways has its own benefits and own disadvantages, but I would say that it really depends upon the company which wants to raise the money. If the company has to raise the money for meeting its working capital, then I would say that raising a capital through angel investor is much more better than raising a capital with VC. If a company wants to gain capital because of marketing and other stuff, then I guess raising the capital from a VC is more beneficial for them. Moving forward, apart from raising the capital, what other solutions can be there to promote the capital outflow in the whole organization? Then I would suggest that more focus should be there on increasing the revenue streams. If there is multiple revenue streams made in a particular product of a startup, then those products and those overall working of that startup will be increased highly, because the profit margin in different products will be increasing. That's why there are two ways: either to raise capital through VC or angel investors, or with that second way, which is promoting the inner workable management of the company by increasing the productivity of the product, or by increasing the multiple revenue streams of the product. Now, next, quickly we will go to the next section, which is being too reliant on government. So government is in term a leader, and most of the people think that government has a lot of money, but trust me guys, government doesn't have too much money. That's the reason why we are having at least 6% of deficit, monetary deficit in our financial budget, because government is not having the amount of money which is required for it to run in a yearly manner. So that's why those people who consider that government has too much money to spend, I think they are wrong, and they have a need to check their research on that. Now, government is also operating in a hierarchical manner. Whenever there is a hierarchical manner, the decision and its speed also get affected with it. Why? Because the decision is taken from the center, and then the decision gets passed by different sections and different hierarchies of that government, which in the process makes the decision making really, really slow. So I would suggest that if any startup is based on government, then I would say that there is a need to change the whole thing into a network basis. Now, moving forward, making short-term commitments. So I think this is something which I've explained previously, but I will just give you a more detailed outlook on that. So if your startup is again having a very long-term goal, then for making that long term goal feasible, you can break that long term goal into multiple short term goals, which will enable that startup to increase the commitments of that long term goals. Now, if in the rather scenario, if you are only having short term goals and short term commitment, then it becomes really disadvantageous for that company or that startup to grow. Why? Because those short term commitment will not have any larger picture or any larger objective to attain. So my suggestion in this will be that for any startup to grow, make long term commitments and then break that long term commitment into smaller part. Maybe if you are making a larger commitment, larger long term commitment of, let's say, 5 years, then you can just divide that long term commitment into short term, like 10 short term commitments that you need to attain. This is how you can make use of the short term commitment into an advantageous manner. Now, the next important thing which a startup, which are community based in India is facing, is having biased against newcomers. So newcomers are people who are newly joining that particular community. And one of the most important thing when I talk about biasedness in the newcomers, against the newcomers, is that again the hierarchy. If the hierarchy is present, then you may expect that there will be some, some biasness toward newcomers. But if the startup, if the community based startup is working in a network basis, in a network solution, then I would suggest that the biasness will be either absolutely no, not there, or there will be minimum biasness for the newcomers. So again, one more thing is very important when I say about biasness. These newcomers are the source of information, new information and new techniques of thinking. So for any startup, if any startup community wants to stay relevant to the world, then I think welcoming the newcomers will be very vital. They are the people who will fuel the future growth of that particular community. Moving forward, if I talk about what feeders want from the community, so there are three things which feeder try to control. And who are the feeders? Feeders are the venture capitalists, governments, and universities. So first is that they want to, they don't want to end this hierarchy pattern. They don't want to drive the network. They want to have themselves towards the whole, whole functioning of that particular community. This is something which is very much prevalent among this feeders. Now, how to address this? Venture capitalists, governments, and universities can be made. There should be certain solutions which should be entitled to that, which will promote network working and more network working and less into the hierarchical manner. If any company do that, then I think there will be a proper solution towards it. Apart from this, there should be a proper solution where people will be having everywhere checks of balances in power, which will promote that no single person or of that particular community takes all the decisions. Now, having a cultural risk aversion. So basically, this is something which is particularly of a concern for a leader of that community. So for a leader, if he's not prone to take risk, then I think the overall functionality of that leader reduces to a lower margin. Why? Because for being a leader, taking risk and again promoting that particular decision and making the full out of it is something which characterizes a leader. Now, for this particular reason, I follow a methodology which is basically means hire and fire. Now, what I mean with this is that if there is a particular plan, if there is a particular plan which is provided to me by my team, then I would hire that plan in my particular management. If that plan doesn't do well, if that plan doesn't meet the expectations which we have for that, then we do not wait to fire it or kill it or change it in that manner. So if you are having this particular problem in your startup based community, then please ensure that you have certain kind of mechanisms. Like if I talk about myself, then I have a mechanism which is called hire or fire. So like this, you can have your own kind of own kind of thinking, and you can manage the whole thing. Apart from this, there will be other things like avoiding people's because of their past failures. So here I will be just giving you a very interesting example. So there has been like a person who is now one of the billionaires, right? So he was working in one of the VCs, right? He was in an asset management company. So what happened is that he made a lot of loss to the company, and that was the reason why he was fired from the company. And the founder of that company actually fired him for a reason that he was making a too much of loss for that particular company. And when that person was fired, guess what? In the next 5 to 10 years, that person created a new company, and that company is now the largest asset management company in the world with the name BlackRock. So now I guess you can, guess the name or even do a Google search on that, and you will find that who is that person. So this is a particular story where, failure is which proves that failure is not the determinant force in making the next success. Failure is just the beginning of having a great success. So guys, please do not avoid people because of their past failures, because God knows those failures may be the instrument for him to succeed in their life. Now, moving forward, we will be talking about holding activities and events. So, for any startup, it is very important to keep those startups very active. How a person can do that, or how a startup can do that? For keeping a community very active, the startup must have certain activities and event which placed in regular intervals of time, which will ensure both. First, it will be a great marketing for that particular startup in that particular community which they are having. Again, apart from that, that will be also increasing the overall participation of those members of that community. How to do that? There can be different kind of activities. Some of them are already mentioned in the screen: tech meetups, open copy clubs, startup weekend, ignite, and startup week. These are the few of the things. Apart from this, there may be verbal activities as well, like hosting a roundtable conference, or even having a Twitter space for that reason. So these are particularly different kind of activities where a startup can engage with its members. Now, the roles of university is very vital. Why? Because they provide the pull for opportunity. When I talk about pull for opportunity, now universities are filled with people who are really very good in different skill sets. Now, what is a university? Particularly, if I talk about community's perspective, it's the university itself is a community of great brains, right? There, these people who are in university itself form a community in itself, and those communities are having really good brains. Their skills are really high in different aspects of working. So university's role in particular communities is very important because they provide the pool for any company to hire the people who are in that colleges or universities. Now, when I talk about the role of university, we should not forget that the power of alumni is very important. Why? Because alumni provide a connections, a mentorship connection with the students, in the particular college or university. Why? Because this alumni most of time are people who have gained, certain value in their life. Like most of the people who are in colleges, someday they will be working in different MNCs. So in the process, they will be learning a lot. When we utilize this power of alumni, these people who are ex student of that particular university have immense knowledge about different fields of life, so they can provide that but their particular experience to the newcomers who are currently studying in the college. So the power of alumni should not be forgotten. Why? Because we need to understand that experience is the best teaching anyone can give to anyone, right? Now, talking about learn for cause, we also have a lot of alumni who were working with us, who have got our education, got any of the like got themselves enrolled in any of the courses which we had. So this there we have a very powerful alumni network. Again, these alumni networks are always in connection with us. They are always open for providing mentorship to the newcomers, and this is how we allocate the whole process of creating value in our community. Now, one of the most important questions which comes is that what is the difference between accelerators and incubators? So this particular question is for all the people who are leaders and who want to start a community. So accelerators and incubators are in general a organization, again a particularly a community which promotes other businesses. Now, whether to take funding from accelerators or take your startup, enroll in the accelerators or to incubators, really depends on a very important factor, which is what is the outlook of your particular startup in the next 5 to 10 years, and also what is the business of that particular startup. To keep things into perspective, if a person is having a startup which is based out of consumer, so which is B2C, so then again if I say B2C, it's basically means business to consumer. So basically if a startup is having a consumer outlook, then I would say going to accelerator really helps a lot. Why? Because accelerators are the type of organization which accelerates the whole process of that particular startup which gets itself enrolled in it. So that is why I would say, I would suggest that accelerators are very good for B2C startups. Now, if I talk about startups which are having a really long outlook and which are not into accelerated growth, then I would say that incubators are really a good option, because they provide a startup a sustainable growth and a sustainable investment. That's why I would say for long term relationship, for any startup with any investment or any incubator will be really beneficial. And for startups which are really into fast growth, then I would suggest that accelerators are the right organization to take the funding from. Now, moving forward, we will be talking about community cultures. So this is something which is not seen or not given a briefing in most of the sessions which I have been part of. But community culture is very important. Why? Because it shows that what a startup is in its core, what is the value which that startup is trying to create, and what is that person who is leading that particular startup wants from that particular community. So startup community, if a startup is community based, then it becomes really important for that startup to have a community culture. What I mean by having a community culture, what I mean is basically that that startup should create certain values which will be mandatory for every person, every member of that community to follow. Doesn't matter whether the startup community is based out of businesses, or whether the startup community is based out of consumers. That doesn't really matter. What really matters is that is those values are being followed or not. Some of them being give before you get. This is a particular thing which is very important for any community culture to have. Now also there are other important things, like everyone should have a particular mentor through which any community can get the right decision making, and that would actually increase the overall intellectuality of that particular community. Apart from this, a startup community should always be open about new ideas, because new ideas pave the way for innovations, which again transform into a very big manner. So that's why ideas should always be given more importance when it comes to building community culture in a startup community. Now we are now reaching in the end part of this whole session. So in this session we will be concluding the whole session with a very wonderful story about companies which we know today as big tech, like Apple, Microsoft, Intel, Facebook. So these are really big companies. If I talk about Apple, it's the largest company by market value. So I would suggest that if you go to the to the beginning of those companies, you would see that those companies have seen a lot of ups and downs in their economic cycles. Now what is economic cycles? Economic cycle is basically a cycle of ups and downs in the economic manner. What I mean with that is that in a economic year, there are some time when the economic output is in maximum portion, and there are some time when the economic output is in the lowest portion. So this is something which goes into a cyclic manner. So all these startup which we see, again Apple, Microsoft, Intel, all of them were big, not big in from the initial days, were very small in the initial days. They were really a startup initially. So these companies faced lot of difficulties, and they actually climbed the ladder of success, and now we know what Apple and Microsoft is. One of the very interesting story which I want to share with you is that the story of Google. So at one point of time, Google was about to go bankrupt, so they went to Microsoft to get themselves purchased. But due to some reason, Microsoft denied the offer, and that is how became a Google climbed their success ladder, and they are now one of the biggest tech firms in the world. So understand guys, failure is not something which will not change, and success is not something which will never come. So please believe in your startup. If you believe in the product which you are having, and if you are having a community based startup, then believe in the community as well, and that is how you will succeed. Do not go into the hunt hunch of going into the cycle of not having the proper capital, there is always a solution of everything. Like the solution of these companies has helped them to grow exponentially. I am very sure that every company, which every viewers who are seeing me, will have their one day success as well. So with this, we will be ending today's session. Thank you guys for hearing me, and we'll meet again. Thank you. I guess we have some questions. Would you like to have CDN help you in building your startup? Uh, Particularly, yes. Okay, I think Rahul has some questions. So, how to build a core team for a community as students? So, for building a core team, Rahul, I would say that you need to go for all the platforms like LinkedIn can be very beneficial. You have to, search uh, different people and find the thing. And it is very important that you need to understand what type of people you want as your core team. So if you want people like for having a very good graphic designing skills, so you have to look for people in like that in different social media platform. One of the mentions would be LinkedIn, because it is a place where professionals communicate. Can you give some tips on getting sponsorship, Avantika? Okay, so sponsorship is something which can be taken, but you should have a proper pitch for that. So whenever you go for pitching a sponsor, I think you should know that what are the key points for that particular event which you want sponsorship of. How do you get a new people in a committee which is not much known? How to get a new people in a community which is okay. So Hitik, I would say that for any community which is not well known, it is very important for you to have a marketing team as first. Once you are done with your marketing team, then you can probably go for making your particular community known, make a noise in the whole manner, whole ecosystem, and then you can get all the numbers. I guess we are done with the whole session. Thank you guys for listening to me, and